There are some recipes that feel like a hug from the past, and this creamy Brazilian sweet corn porridge is one of them. In Brazil, we call it mingau de milho verde, and for many people it brings back memories of June festivals, warm kitchens, and that familiar smell of cinnamon floating through the air. It is simple, humble, and yet somehow it always manages to feel special. Maybe that is why this dish has stayed so close to Brazilian hearts for generations. Today, I want to show you how a few basic ingredients can turn into something deeply comforting. Fresh green corn, milk, sugar, and a touch of cinnamon are all you need to create a dessert that is soft, fragrant, and full of tradition. It is the kind of recipe that reminds us that good food does not need to be complicated to be memorable. In fact, some of the most loved dishes are the ones made slowly, with care, in an ordinary pot on the stove. As we begin, notice how the corn is the real star here. When it is fresh, it gives the porridge a natural sweetness and a delicate flavor that feels unmistakably Brazilian. But there is an important detail that makes all the difference: the corn must be strained well after blending. That may sound like a small step, but it is what helps the final texture become smooth, creamy, and elegant instead of rough or heavy. It is one of those little kitchen secrets that changes everything. And that is part of the charm of traditional Brazilian home cooking. These recipes carry not only flavor, but also memory, family, and celebration. You can almost imagine a grandmother stirring the pot gently, watching the mixture thicken, and knowing exactly when it has reached that perfect point. The kitchen fills with sweetness, the cinnamon begins to warm the air, and suddenly the whole house feels calmer. If you enjoy recipes like this, take a moment to like the video, because it helps more people discover these classic Brazilian flavors. And if you have ever seen or tasted mingau de milho verde before, I'd love to know in the comments. Where in Brazil or outside of it did you first hear about this recipe? Stay with me, because in the next step, I'll show you exactly how to turn these simple ingredients into a smooth, creamy porridge worth remembering. Once the corn is ready, everything becomes simpler than it looks. I like to start by cutting the kernels from the cob and placing them in the blender with milk, because that is where the flavor begins to bloom. The green corn gives the mixture its natural sweetness and that unmistakable countryside aroma, the kind that instantly reminds many Brazilians of June festivals, warm kitchens, and family gatherings around a table. As the blades work, the corn disappears into a pale, fragrant cream, and this is the moment when you can already feel the recipe turning into something special. But there is an important detail here that changes everything: the corn must be strained. This may seem like a small step, almost too simple to matter, yet it is exactly what gives the porridge its smooth, delicate texture. Many people skip this part and end up with a grainy result, heavier than it should be. When you strain the mixture well, you remove the fibrous bits and keep only the creamy essence of the corn, which is what makes mingau de milho verde so comforting and elegant at the same time. It is a humble dessert, yes, but it deserves care. Then the mixture goes to the stove, along with sugar and a little more milk if needed. From this point on, patience is everything. You stir gently, watching the liquid transform slowly as the heat works its magic. At first it seems thin and ordinary, almost like it may never become a true porridge. But little by little, the texture changes. It thickens, softens, and takes on that velvety body that clings to the spoon. The kitchen fills with a sweet, warm scent, and if you add cinnamon, the whole room seems to change mood. It becomes cozier, almost festive, like a quiet celebration in the middle of an ordinary day. This is the kind of recipe that teaches us to slow down and enjoy the process. There is beauty in simple ingredients, especially when they carry memory, tradition, and affection in every spoonful. Brazilian cooking often has that gift: it turns what is familiar into something deeply comforting. And when you finally see the porridge reaching the perfect creamy point, you understand why this recipe has remained so loved for generations. If you're enjoying this journey through Brazilian flavors, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, what Brazilian dish reminds you most of home? As the blender does its work, the kitchen slowly fills with that unmistakable scent of fresh corn, soft and sweet, almost like a reminder of childhood afternoons and family gatherings. The mixture becomes smooth and bright, and this is exactly where many people make the mistake of rushing ahead. If you skip straining it, the porridge can lose that silky finish that makes mingau de milho verde so special. So I always take the time to pass it through a sieve, pressing gently to keep only the creamy liquid and leave behind the fibrous bits. It's a simple step, but it changes everything. Then, back on the stove, the magic begins to happen. The milk warms first, calm and steady, and when the corn mixture joins it, the color turns into a beautiful golden cream. Sugar goes in, not too much, just enough to bring out the natural sweetness of the corn, and a pinch of salt helps balance everything in the background. I stir slowly, watching the spoon draw soft lines through the pan as the texture starts to thicken. It's the kind of cooking that asks for patience, not haste. The kind that rewards you with comfort. If you've ever been to a June festival in Brazil, you know this aroma. It drifts through the air alongside roasted peanuts, corn cakes, and the sound of cheerful music, bringing people closer together. This porridge belongs to that world. It's humble, yes, but it carries memory, celebration, and a feeling of home in every spoonful. And even if you're making it on an ordinary day, the result still has that festive warmth that makes everything feel a little more special. As the porridge reaches its perfect creamy point, I like to think about how recipes like this survive because they are passed from one kitchen to another, one generation to the next. There's something deeply comforting about that. No complicated technique, no expensive ingredients, just care, attention, and respect for tradition. And if you're enjoying this kind of Brazilian recipe, leave a like so more people can discover it too. I'd also love to know, have you ever heard of mingau de milho verde before, or is this your first time coming across it? As the pot stays on the stove, you can really see the magic of this recipe happening slowly, almost patiently, like so many comforting dishes from Brazilian family kitchens. The mixture begins to change from a thin, pale liquid into something richer, fuller, and more inviting. At this point, the key is not to rush it. Stirring gently and consistently helps the corn cream thicken evenly, keeping it smooth and velvety as it warms. And if you strained the corn well earlier, that silky texture becomes even more beautiful, without any gritty surprise in the final result. That's one of those small details that makes all the difference. There's something very familiar about this moment. Maybe it reminds you of a grandmother standing by the stove, checking the spoon, adjusting the heat, and saying that good food needs attention, not hurry. In Brazil, especially during June festivals, recipes like this carry more than flavor. They carry memory. They carry the sound of laughter in the background, the smell of cinnamon in the air, and the feeling of being taken care of. A simple dessert like this can turn an ordinary afternoon into something warm and special. And that's why mingau de milho verde continues to be so loved. It doesn't need expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. It uses what many Brazilian homes already know so well: fresh corn, milk, sugar, and a little cinnamon to finish. The result is a dessert that feels rustic, but at the same time elegant in its simplicity. It is the kind of recipe that speaks softly, yet stays in your memory. If you're enjoying this journey through Brazilian home cooking, leave a like so more people can discover this comforting tradition too. And tell me in the comments, is there a Brazilian dish or festival tradition that brings back memories for you? I'd love to read your story. In a moment, we'll bring this creamy porridge to its final texture and see how to serve it in the most inviting way. As the corn mixture begins to warm, the kitchen slowly changes. What was once just a handful of simple ingredients becomes something alive, fragrant, and full of promise. The sweet scent of green corn starts to rise from the pan, softened by the milk and rounded out by the sugar, while the cinnamon waits nearby like a quiet finishing touch. This is the kind of recipe that does not ask for hurry. It asks for attention, for patience, for that calm stirring that turns an ordinary afternoon into a small celebration. And this is where many people discover the secret that makes all the difference: the texture. If the corn is not strained well, the porridge can lose that smooth, velvety finish that makes mingau de milho verde so comforting. Those tiny bits can remain, and instead of a creamy spoonful, you get something less refined, less tender. So I always say, take this step seriously. Strain it carefully, press gently, and let the liquid do the work. That simple act transforms the recipe from rustic to irresistible. You can almost imagine a Brazilian June festival from here. Somewhere in the background, there's music playing, paper flags moving with the evening breeze, and people gathered around tables filled with homemade sweets. A bowl of mingau like this belongs in that scene. It feels warm in the hands, familiar in the heart, and deeply connected to the kind of food that carries memory from one generation to the next. It's the sort of dessert that grandparents remember, that parents recreate, and that children learn to love without even understanding why at first. As the mixture thickens, it changes character. It goes from thin and pale to rich and creamy, coating the spoon more slowly, settling into that perfect consistency that tells you it is almost ready. The aroma becomes fuller now, with the corn bringing sweetness and the cinnamon adding a gentle, nostalgic note. There's something so peaceful about watching it come together, like the recipe itself is teaching us to slow down and enjoy the moment. If you're enjoying this comforting Brazilian classic, take a second to leave a like, because it helps more people discover these traditional flavors. And I'd love to know, what Brazilian dish or ingredient makes you feel at home, even if you're far away from Brazil? If this kind of recipe speaks to you, stay with me, because the final touch is what gives this mingau its true soul. And now, with the porridge finally reaching that soft, creamy point, you can see how a few simple ingredients turn into something deeply comforting. The corn has given up its sweetness, the milk has wrapped everything in smoothness, and the cinnamon on top finishes it with that warm, familiar aroma that feels like home. This is the kind of recipe that doesn't try to impress with complexity. It wins people over with memory, with tradition, and with the gentle way it fills the kitchen with a scent that makes everyone come a little closer. There's something beautiful about dishes like this, especially during Brazilian June festivals, when the air seems to carry more laughter, more music, and more appetite for homemade comfort. A bowl of mingau de milho verde speaks to that spirit perfectly. It's rustic, but elegant in its own way. Simple, but full of character. And when it's made well, with the corn properly strained and the texture just right, every spoonful feels silky, cozy, and full of flavor. If you've never tried making it at home, this is one of those recipes that can surprise you. It teaches patience. It teaches attention. And it reminds us that traditional Brazilian food often shines brightest when we respect the basics. That little step of straining the corn, for example, may seem small, but it changes everything. It's the difference between a porridge that feels rough and one that feels truly smooth and comforting. Sometimes, that's where the best cooking lessons live, in the details. I love recipes like this because they connect generations. Maybe you've tasted something similar at a family gathering, at a June party, or in the kitchen of someone who cooked with love instead of measuring every emotion. Food like this carries stories. It carries the warmth of Brazilian homes, the sound of a spoon against a bowl, and the kind of sweetness that stays with you long after the last bite. If this recipe brought back a memory for you, or if you enjoyed discovering a little more about Brazilian cuisine today, leave a like so this tradition can reach more people. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What curiosity do you have about Brazil, its flavors, or its food traditions? Your question might inspire the next recipe we explore together. If you want more comforting Brazilian recipes like this, make sure to subscribe, because there's always another delicious story waiting in the kitchen.